So you're just a little man after all, Doctor. Like all the rest. You disappoint me.
Ready when you are.
C. Screwdrivers, Scissor Sisters, all that and a pair of diabolical masterminds on this week's episode of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that hopes it's the Daleks, I don't think, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Tonight, the TARDIS crew flounder as they explore the lost civilization of Atlantis. Polly narrowly avoids gaining some fish fingers, while Ben and Jamie get stuffed to the gills with on-the-turn plankton. Will the Second Doctor manage to prevent the dastardly Professor Zaroff carrying out a seafood boil for the ages? Nothing in the world can stop us from carping on about the Underwater Menace.
And Britain has elected an ass, and America is worried about it. Seems a bit far-fetched to me. Will the 10th Doctor get by on a wing and a prayer? And what happens if you force an 8-year-old child to watch the Doctor Who title sequence? We show our true ages and review The Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords.
Hello, John.
Hey, Matt.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. Well, we're back. Second week running.
Well, hey.
This hot streak of a third series of...
And a first.
It's a bit presumptuous for me to call it a hot streak, isn't it?
Well,
I'm sorry.
You know,
it's like, leave us a nice review in iTunes.
2 out of 2 ain't bad. It's only if we miss the next one that we've hit the meatloaf thing. Anyway, but look, I wanted to say this is obviously a first because we're recording this in.
Is it a Joseph first?
A what?
Joseph first.
Oh, I see. Sorry, yes.
No,
It's not a... No,
the panic in your eyes.
My God, sorry. It's just... it's been a long day. No, but we are recording this in my gaff, which, as followers of our Twitter feed may recall, I had already revealed, was formerly David Collins' house.
This is incredible.
So we are in Mordrin's house.
Absolutely. It's not, to paint a picture, it's not quite the same sort of pastel Art Deco extravaganza that Mordrin's ship has.
Sadly not, no. It was clearly redecorated at some point after his...
But he thought to leave the metamorphic symbiosis regenerator behind?
Yeah, well, it was in the lean-to. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, there you go. David Collins isn't still with us, is he?
No.
Okay,
no, he sadly he isn't. He died.
Okay. Well, before I go down the route of making any more tasteless jokes, tonight we have actually, possibly in the spirit of Mordrin, we are looking back at 2 episodes or 2 Doctor Who stories that feature particularly dastardly masterminds. Later tonight, we'll be talking about The Sound of Drums. And
no sign of Eric Saywood either.
Hey! But tonight, we are kicking off with The Underwater Menace, which, John, you are rapidly thumbing open the Wikipedia page as we speak. When did The Underwater Menace broadcast?
Oh, so this was 14th of Jan to the 4th of Feb, 1967.
1967. So a couple of notable things about this. This is the earliest surviving Troughton story, am I right? Or in terms of episodes that we can see. Even then, yes.
Only half of it.
Only 2 and 4. 2 and 3. One of those episodes was one of the more recent finds, I think, wasn't it? Which really... I think goes to show the potluck element now of what you're going to find when... Well, not to prejudice what we're going to say about the Underwater Menace, but I'm not sure if it was particularly high on anyone's lists of must-find episodes. It's also the first full story which to feature Jamie as a fully fledged companion after he leaves with the TARDIS crew at the end of his previous story, The Highlanders. And there were quite a few last-minute rewrites on this to accommodate the extra cast member, which I'm sure we'll discuss how that plays out in due course.
Yeah.
But anyway, what happens in The Underwater Menace? Well, the TARDIS crew land on a beach, which turns out to be made primarily of volcanic rock. and Polly finds some artifacts that date it to planet Earth in the year 1970. But through pursuing a network of caves in the volcano, as it turns out, that they've landed on, they find the missing underwater civilization of Atlantis, the mythical civilization. They find it quite easily, to be honest. It's given many thousands of people that have been searching for it for centuries. But not only do they find the Atlantans and their civilization, they also find the villainous Professor Zaroff, who is working... Well, he's persuaded the Atlantans that he is going to raise their once-lost civilization back to its former glory, but he has some more sinister motives afoot. 4 episodes. Episodes 2 and 3 still exist. You can watch them by whatever means you deem appropriate.
Legal.
I listened to the audio with narration by Nika Wills for episodes 1 and 4. John, what did you make of the Underwater Menace?
Well, I didn't listen to the audio versions of the missing episodes. I watched the version that's up on BritBox, which is a streaming service that maybe a lot of you are aware of.
ITVX. The official home of classic Doctor Who streaming is ITVX. That bends your brain a bit, doesn't it?
It does. It doesn't seem right at all. I feel it in my waters. No, but that has the telesnaps approach. So it's purely just the audio from the television audio, and so you lose a lot of the cues. Like the opening of episode 1 is actually quite mystifying without narration of, you were saying the Annika Wills narration was saying things like she finds some artifacts on the beach or whatever. Like, you don't get any sense of that. There's lots of waves crashing and so on and so forth, and hearing them running about on the shingle, and it doesn't really tie together very well, which of course is not the fault of the director Julia Smith, given that she'd actually filmed visuals for this. And indeed,
we can't hold that against her.
No, and indeed, generally, sorry, I think this is quite well handled from a directorial perspective. It's
really. Oh, okay. Sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite. I think it's pretty. It looks pretty good. I mean, like the tank of water must have cost an absolute fortune. And though ill-conceived from an artistic point of view, the sort of underwater dance section in episode 3. Somebody had obviously been to the cinema and the previous year and watched Thunderball when it came out, and decided that was it 65? I can't remember whether it was 65 or 66. But anyway, someone had seen Thunderball and thought, yeah, what people really loved about that film were the endless underwater sequences, which, so that...
Do you know what? I mean, that sequence, a lot of people snark on it as not really working. And so when it rolled around in episode 3, I was kind of expected to go, oh, here we go. I can't say it's a swing and a hit, but it's not exactly a swing and a miss. Like, I appreciate the ambition of it, and I don't think it's terribly rendered. I mean, there's a few sort of visible wires, and you never.
No, I think it's well done, and I love the fish people costumes. I absolutely love them.
Yeah,
their sequins, as if they've just come off the Blackpool dance floor. But
it's appropriately aquatic. They look like they just stepped off a cruise ship. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, two shows a night. I thought that sequence was pleasantly strange.
Yeah.
And I didn't really. It was too long, and it didn't really serve any purpose, and it got a little bit dull towards the end. But I liked the fact that they had a go at it, and I thought it was quite fun. I liked this a lot more than I thought I would, largely because I feel that the Troughton era hasn't settled into its Yawnsville, Arizona base under siege sort of format. This is still, and obviously I just love Ben and Polly. I think they're fantastic characters, and they work really well together. And in this, the lovely banter between the TARDIS crew, when they're first taken in episode 1, and Ben says, "Oi, Polly, you speak foreign. Try try getting her to speak with him. And so, some props as well to
They
obviously
called
Jeffrey.
Jamie me old haggis at one point as well.
I know. But I think Jeffrey Orm deserves some credit in the writing there. And you tend to get that kind of synergistic or alchemic sort of writing when the performances and the characters are so brilliantly drawn by the actors that the writing sort of flows off the page because of the way it's written. I thought there was some really interesting stuff in this about sort of the nature of hope and resistance and worker organisation. That seems to be a big part of it too. I guess we'll come on to that. Matt, what was your sort of overall take of this? I don't think I loved it, but I liked it more than I thought I would because I've not generally enjoyed the Troughton ones much.
Yeah, I mean, it sits at that interesting point. I mean, I'd have to go and do a lot more research than I have on this to find out, if this was ever considered for a Hartnell script. But we're in that season where, the first couple of stories of season 4 are Hartnell stories, and then the handover occurs, a few episodes in. To the point where it's quite surprising to see the Hartnell title sequence as we sort of remember it at the start of the Troughton episode. So yeah, it's in that sort of experimental phase, and it's interesting. It's kind of widely regarded as a bit of a dud, this, and Troughton went on record and said he wasn't very happy with it, and then subsequently Innes Lloyd, the producer, has said, yeah, it was a bit B-movie. Something I find interesting is that to single this one out as a bit B-movie is perhaps a tad unfair, because I think there is a lot of, in a way that Doctor Who has never really leaned into thematically before, there's a lot of stories in this run that feel very sort of pulpy American B-movie. So the Macra Terror slightly further down the line, you've got the giant crabs. Here you've got
the moon base, which is the next
yeah, absolutely, the moon base.
serial.
So I was going to say, gadgetry that can control the weather. And then, here you've got Atlantis, which, I mean, obviously as a myth or, an allegory, it dates back to Plato. But is one of those kind of, it's there with, like, the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and stuff. It's kind of that level of mythology, and mythology that sort of lingered around a bit now in some corners of the internet, into the 20th century. Doctor Who's never really leaned into it that much. So I quite like, and especially compared to the Base Under Siege stuff that's coming down the pipe the following year, I quite like the attempts to do the sort of giddy, like 50s pulpy B-movie kind of aesthetic, and to bring that to Doctor Who. I also think, you mentioned Jeffrey Orm, and actually there is some decent dialogue in here and some good scenes as well, which and some good interplay as well. So in episode 4, for example, where there's that whole thing where Ben is pretending to be the prison guard and escorting the Doctor back to Professor Zaroff's laboratory.
Yes.
Ben gets a whole load of stuff about, like, I'm bringing this Burke here, can't you see he's not normal?
Yeah,
or something. And the Doctor gets to be a little bit stung by all of this. There's some good interplay. There was a scene that I sort of singled out early on as well. So when I can't remember who it is that actually says it to the Doctor. Maybe it's Zaroff who says, "Why should I trust?" Oh no, it's the Temple guy.
Ramu.
Why should I trust you? And the Doctor says, "That's a good question. Wish I could think of a good answer." Which, there's some slightly better writing here than the story's overall reputation would suggest. I think
I really liked those shifting sands of trust between the Doctor and Ramu. That was quite a well observed and quite tightly written bit. I agree with you. I thought that was quite good. That,
and it's also an interestingly kind of energetic portrayal of the second Doctor still, but again, before it sort of just settles down into what Troughton Doctor Who kind of becomes. There's obviously an attempt to draw still a contrast between the Hartnell Doctor, who is in relatively recent memory for viewers, earlier this season. So the Doctor here is very sneaky, and he loves getting into a disguise, and there's almost something about a bit Seventh Doctor-ish as well, about how he turns up knowing all about Professor Zaroff and how Zaroff might be up to something, and he doesn't bother to tell Ben, Polly and Jamie that at all when he's getting there. It's only when he turns up on the scene that he's kind of pretty clued up that there's something going on here. It's not like he turns up with the intention of stopping Zaroff. So all of that stuff is quite nice. I don't think they're taking anything particularly for granted. My main issue is that I don't think it's a particularly involving story. A lot of the narrative just tends to sort of shuffling pieces around the board. And also a lot of the action and things that occur narratively do sort of rely on everyone being utterly stupid. So like the whole sort of voice coming from the idol kind of thing, which, you know, that scene's a good example. That, I mean, obviously that's a huge kind of B-movie cliche as well, that kind of thing happens, but all of the Atlantans sort of avert their gaze. I mean, it's not their fault that the set is obviously, the studio space is obviously very small, but it's like the fact that the Doctor and the other guy are able to sort of fairly leisurely make their escape and no one thinks to look up and see what's going on. Yeah. It's sort of like it... And some of this is in the script, some of it's in the realisation, I think. But it sort of cleaves to that school play kind of logic of like the suspension of disbelief, not just because of the sets and the special effects, but that anyone in this situation would act this way at all. Like this, you have to hard suspend your disbelief. And it didn't quite charm me enough, and its experimental bits weren't quite experimental enough for me to like go with it really. So I sort of like I think maybe you know, I mean, like with the Macra Terror as well, and you know, the Faceless one's a bit further down the line, which I seem to remember getting off to an absolutely cracking start, and aspects of the Moon Base actually, which you know, I thought was a bit better than I thought it was going to be,
certainly from the design perspective.
Yeah, I quite like this sort of early Troughton era in comparison to what comes later, because it is still sort of experimenting with the formula a bit, but it doesn't really work. I don't think it's very good.
I think I'm probably a bit more generous to this than you then, because I was quite taken with the as is often the case, I suppose, but I was quite taken with the political stuff within it. And to be clear, like, you know, you've got, on the one hand, mad scientists with the arrogance of science taken to the nth degree. I will do it because I can, sort of thing. Yeah,
that I made a note. I want to discuss that, but sort of carry on.
And then, of course, you've got that against the priest class, and so the ignorance of idols, the perceived ignorance of religion, and so on and so forth. I mean, down to the fact that the solution at the end is to flood both the temple and the lab. So
yeah,
it's just how happens
when you put it like that.
That
well, and the Lanterns, in choosing to sort of rebuild society, I mean, it's sort of said essentially that they're going to rebuild Atlantis as a secular, rational society, aren't they, rather than a religious and superstition based one,
or one where there's a kind of amoral science. We do it because we can, sort of, or leading into immorality. But you know, the idea that you could apply this sort of live by scientific principles alone, but not the ignorance of it. Yeah, I mean, it seems to want to get you to a safe post-war consensus social democratic society with checks and balances and labour organisations and I mean, the introduction of the mines, and particularly the two characters. I think it's Sean, isn't it? And Sean and Jacko. Jacko, obviously...
Yeah, they're an interesting pair.
Yeah, and Jacko, obviously, played by Paul Anil, who I couldn't find a great deal of information about, frankly. But, he's clearly British Indian, or certainly subcontinental. And Sean is an Irish character. I'm not sure that P.G. Stevens himself was Irish. I don't know. But
so he says, "What's that sound?" He said, "Well, it's not closing time at Paddy Murphy's pub."
Yeah, no, it's sensitively covered there by Jeffrey Orme. But yeah, as broadly as some of those things might have been handled, bearing in mind it was 1967. What's interesting about that is that ultimately there is an alliance that is built between Ben, Jamie, Sean, and Jacko. And though they have very, very different backgrounds, what brings them together is their status as well as slave labor, but oppressed workers in a mine, in that mine. And they then also manage to effectively have a wild cat strike amongst the fish people, and persuade them to get involved in that as well.
And the fish people as well, that's quite horrible. I may have read this wrong, but am I right in thinking that they are a slave class who have been converted?
They've been converted
in order to be able to work underwater. So it's not like they're a native race of fish people who have been enslaved. I mean, that's a really grim idea.
Oh yeah,
that cliffhanger to episode 1 where they're about to put Polly under the knife is actually horrible.
Yeah, really horrible. Because she's screaming no, like screaming. It's a brilliant performance by Annika Wills. It's actually really unpleasant. It's meant to be. There's some real body horror stuff, and Colin Jeavons, who plays what's his name, Damon. The kind of crazy character, crazier from Trial of Time Lord. But he's the one who performs these operations to convert people to fish people, and it's his life's work to put gills on people's necks or whatever. But so he's sort of coercing her into that and violently. It's horrible, and it's a great cliffhanger, but it's nasty. There's some decent body horror there, but
it's also, I made a note that we're only a few weeks out from another conversion story where, obviously the Cybermen's debut, 10th Planet, which plays on a similar... But in a way, the fact that, the 10th Planet plays on a fear that we might accidentally do this to ourselves because of our fear of mortality. Whereas here, the fact that, it is an oppression... And again, correct me if I'm wrong, the script doesn't really go into who the fish people were before they became fish people. But leave that to the imagination is actually...
What it said is that people who... survivors from shipwrecks and things like that, so that's the kind of... That's what they talk about in it. Sort of they're the people who are brought in to work in the mines and then also be converted to fish people. And so it's,
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
There's a lot of
actually... there's again, and I'm sort of going to slightly talk in ignorance about this, but one of my favourite ever musical acts is the Detroit techno duo Drexciya, who kind of built this whole underwater... It's quite Atlantis sort of theme, but they built this whole sort of, in the early 90s, this whole mythology around the fact that there was this race of underwater sea people who were born out of... They were the children born from the pregnant women who were thrown overboard during the slave trade. And there's absolutely no kind of racial or... Well, I think there is quite a political element, but it's a different thing. But again, that's horrible. People from shipwrecks and
it's quite grim, and there's quite a lot of, again, I don't know how consciously Jeffrey Orr was doing this, but there was a lot of stuff that reminded me of things that happened particularly in continental Europe during the Second World War. My wife is from Luxembourg, and she's been telling me stories about the way that her great aunties and great aunt in particular was involved in the Luxembourgish resistance during the occupation by Germany under the Nazi government at the time, obviously, and how they would move people around, whether that was fallen airmen British airmen who needed to be repatriated or got about, or resistance people going between cells. They would use the change in the shifts in the mines when thousands of people would be out in the streets to move people around. And again, in this, that it's when they have a change in the shift in the mine that they manage. Jamie and Ben manage to sneak away with Sean Jacko to get away and sort of make good their escape. Similarly, when the guards are looking for the Doctor, there's the older stall worker, the woman, who hides Polly under a carpet.
Yeah.
And there's no question of, like, she doesn't know Polly. She doesn't know her at all, but she just, in an instinctive act of resistance, just hides her and says, well, I can't sell my carpets if you start, thrusting forks through them and that sort of thing. And I just thought it was a nice little beat that, Doctor Who, at its clumsiest, can sometimes be guilty of everyone on this planet thinks like this.
Yes. And
what this was showing was that there were layers of people thinking different things within that society, or being fed up with the way the guards went around and that sort of thing. And I also really, just generally speaking, like the hope in resistance, the worker organisation aspect, democracy, freedom, the association of people. Because at the end you have the king, Faust, Damon, who was basically, committing sort of war crime style surgery. But you got Faust, Damon, Jacko, and Sean all together at the end of episode 4, sort of chatting and helping each other get away from the flooding and so on and so forth. And it sort of suggests that kind of rational dialogue that neither becomes so desiccated as, like Zaroff, so desiccated in pursuit of science that it becomes amoral or immoral, nor so wedded to dogma like the religious folk. That kind of humanistic dialogue is the route to progress. And I thought that was all, given that there were also flamboyant costumes and fish people and a mad scientist, I thought it was quite nice that it managed to kind of strike those notes at the same time.
Yeah, there are some interesting beats there. I mean, I think mainly its problems are to do with narrative and pacing. Essentially, it's like, again, it's just how it moves the pieces around on the board and what it.
People say the same about us. To be fair,
yeah, absolutely,
narrative and pacing.
So let's talk about Professor Zaroff, seeing as this is our diabolical mastermind special.
Yeah, in a way I felt he was the least interesting thing in this.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I think, in a way, I mean, I'm trying to think, like, okay, so listeners, write in, email us, please, with other examples of truly mad scientists. So the mad scientist trope comes from this idea that the pursuit of knowledge via the scientific method ultimately will make you amoral and inhuman. And yeah, it struck me as quite refreshing from a villainy point of view that, Zaroff doesn't have a motive other than the idea that basically he wants to destroy the Earth for shits and giggles to see if it's possible to do it. I mean, like, he's literally mad. I mean, he's a mad scientist. He's not looking to enslave the Earth or for power or, for any sort of one-upmanship. He's just like, can I do it? And it's quite. I just thought it was quite striking to see that in Doctor Who, which, has obviously got a litany of big, dastardly, villainous performances. Some more which we'll discuss later on.
But I mean, this is obviously in the midst of the Cold War, right? So it's obvious why the mad scientist trope would emerge from like the 50s and 60s.
Really obvious now you pointed out.
Because if you say, well, we're going to do this thing because we can. I mean, people's morality around the question of nuclear weapons varies, and honest people can take very divergent opinions.
This thing that we're building definitely could blow up the planet.
Yes. It doesn't seem like a massively good idea. But yeah, I mean, that is a whole extra different debate. But that's where all this comes from. And it's, the Cuban Missile Crisis was only 5 years before. When did Dr. Strangelove come out? Also, it's around that time as well, isn't it? Early 60s. So 64. Yeah, 1964. So, that's 3 years before this. So it's very much in the zeitgeist. And then, of course, when you take that that kind of view of the bomb and where you feel about it. I'm thinking about the Tom Lehrer songs as well. When you bolt that onto the kind of science fiction movement and the kind of Twilight Zone and B movies and so on, it's inevitable that these characters will emerge, and they do. But I don't think it makes him particularly interesting, because essentially he's just a kind of he's just a trope.
Yes.
And I don't think we're the first to kind of, it's the episode 3 cliffhanger, isn't it?
Yes.
Nothing in the world.
The infamous.
Yeah. Which he barks, I think, quite... I mean, I think if you're given that line, there's only one way to deliver it. No, nothing in the world can stop me now! I mean, how else are you... I mean, I think if you're given that line, you go for it. And, Joseph first does. So I don't really have a go at him for that, but I don't think there's much on the page. He's far and away the least interesting.
He commits to the part as it's given to him on paper, I think.
But it's not the best performance in the Underwater Menace, which surely goes to the woefully underused Peter Stevens as Lolam, the head priest. Oh yeah, who is deliciously camp. And well, actually, I dealt with it because I went and the goddess spoke and they just disappeared. So I'm basically the best.
He's got the headdress with all the pipes coming out.
Yeah,
of it as well.
No, he's absolutely magnificent. And I thought it was a delicious performance, and I felt like he stole the scene that he was in, and I would have liked to have seen a lot more of him, but hey ho.
So just a quick note then, while we're talking about performances on the TARDIS crew. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that it's quite. I think Troughton's really good in this. It's partly because I think the writing is giving him lots of stuff to do. He gets to be sneaky and a master of disguise and wisecrack, and moments where he plays dumb and moments where he can reveal his mastery of the situation. And obviously we're long-term Ben and Polly, Jesus. Ben and Polly, that's staying in. Ben and Polly fans. They're great performances, just great ideas for characters. Fraser Hines as Jamie.
Yeah.
I mean, he basically tags around with Ben for the duration.
Yeah.
And he
doesn't really develop a dynamic with Polly.
No.
I feel like Ben and Polly's dynamic is really strong.
Yeah.
And Michael Cray's, Annika Wills, there's a kind of it's the same as the affection between the Doctor and Joe Grant in the Third Doctor's run, where you just feel that there's a real chemistry and a connection that kind of. So I think Ben and Polly are great, and Fraser does feel a bit gooseberry in this.
I mean, the chemistry that will emerge is between him and Troughton, because they are
absolutely
really good together.
Yeah,
I mean that's the thing, because Jamie was a late addition to the cast. This had to be rewritten at the last minute, or relatively close to shooting in order to accommodate him. And you imagine that was done by probably just
reallocating bits of Ben's.
That's it.
Yeah, bits of
other
Ben's.
people's bits of data.
Yeah.
But you can sort of see why they would have been keen to keep Fraser Hines around, because he's very charming and he's got a real sort of gung-ho spirit. And I think what I appreciated is that they didn't get too hung up on the idea that he's a guy from the past, because if you lean into that too far, it's just going to become a real drag on the narrative. The idea that he's a guy from hundreds of years in the past and he's not going to understand anything. And there's a nice moment where the Doctor quotes Robert Burns and Jamie says, "Who?" And he says, "Oh yeah, it would have been after your time."
Yeah.
But I like the fact that otherwise Jamie he just sort of is there, he gets on with it, he gets stuck into the adventure. And at the end, he gets that nice moment when TARDIS where he says, like, "Oh, I really like it here." It's like, it's fun. So I think it was just I mean, he's not given much development or really much to do, but he's a charming and cheerful enough presence that you can obviously see why they were keen to make him a regular.
Oh, I would agree. Yeah. I think so too. He's very charming. I don't think it quite settles, and it's just a pity. I always just feel it's a pity that we don't get a bit more of Ben and Polly. But I don't want to take away from Fraser Hines' performance, and Jamie is a very charming character. And as you say, that dynamic between Troughton's Doctor and Jamie is, through a run of stories I don't much like, that's one of the things that truly endures and makes it sort of watchable, at least. Final word on. I did want to have a say. I did want to praise Dudley Simpson's score in this.
Score's great.
I thought it was low key and mysterious, and sort of, especially the music around the kind of the human sacrifice and anything to do with the cult. I thought it was really well done. It wasn't as intrusive as some of his later work.
Yeah.
Not that I dislike the later work, but I thought that this was really nicely handled by Dudley Simpson.
And also worth just a quick mention about Julia Smith, the director. I mean, I think maybe you're a little more generous towards the direction on this than I am. I think Doctor Who. And we've mentioned this in the past, that Doctor Who kind of enshrines this as a credit on your CV forever, really. And it might be the case that there's a lot of sort of journeyman directors or actors or performers or writers on this for whom they might not consider this their best work, but it's the thing everyone's always going to bring up.
Yeah, but she did.
Yeah, that was what I was building towards. She obviously was the creator and initial showrunner of EastEnders. And El Dorado. Yes. So I guess EastEnders saved her from everyone asking her about the Underwater Menace all the time. But El Dorado maybe
saved this from being the worst thing on her CV.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, yeah, this has surprised me slightly.
I think I like this better than you did.
I think you liked it better than me, but I agree with you that this wasn't the bust that I expected it to be. I mean, I expected to be bored shitless by this in a way that I often am by the Troughtons.
Yeah, me too.
And I wasn't. I thought it was a bit on it, but I don't think it really works. But all right, I'm going to upgrade my view to like this is a swing and a miss.
I think it swings, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure it hits, but I'm not sure it's a miss either. I think of it more as a first. What are the baseball thing? First strike? Is it?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
First strike. Strike one.
3 and you're out.
Greece is the home of democracy, mythology, several delicious flavors of gelato, and these cool little fish baths that clean your feet, or at least make you tingle. And based on writings by the one and only Plato, it could also be home to the legendary lost city of Atlantis. And I'm here to find it. I'll figure this thing out by tomorrow. Latest. Tops.
Okay, so for our second story tonight, we are hurtling forward in time to 2007. So, what is this?
40 short years later.
40 short years later. And I don't know if this is something worth lingering on or discussing in any great detail, but what is this now like? How old is this piece of TV? 16 years old?
16 years old.
16 years old this year. And it's like, it is interesting to go back to the Davis era now. And particularly, you know, because obviously he's coming back to the series later this year. But this was quite a long time ago now, and it does feel like TV from a different era. We sort of bracket together modern Doctor Who as being one sort of monolithic thing compared to the various decades of, you know, televisual practice and stuff that you can track through the old series. But yeah, this is. I'm not going to say showing its age, but this feels like a piece of TV from a different era now, which is an interesting dynamic.
Because it is.
Because it is. Yes. Yeah, basically, sorry, I spent about 60 seconds waffling around the fact that
you're old now.
16 years ago is quite a long stretch of time.
Yeah.
John, do you want to summarise Sound of Drums / Last of the Time Lords?
So the wisdom of separating this from Utopia I do think of Utopia as a precursor story. It's not really a three-parter.
Davis would agree with us on this. He says you could bracket this how you like. He says it's not for him to decide how you want to watch it, but he regards it as an episode that leads into a two-parter rather than a three-parter.
Okay, well, I agree with him on that. So good. I feel better about that.
Tick.
But yeah, so the Master has stolen the Doctor's TARDIS, although the Doctor has rigged it so that he can only go back to the present-day Earth or
Which? Well, no, it's the last place the TARDIS went to, which this being the Davis era was present-day London.
Yeah, obviously. So, so that's where he's ended up. And obviously, through a series of machinations, the Master has managed to get himself elected as the populist, but curiously policy-light Harold Saxon, as elected as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And he is engaged in a sort of first contact style sort of situation with a race called the Toclafane, who it turns out are the people that we met in Utopia with their faces sliced off and put into a spherical robot. And the Doctor tries to stop these Toclafane from arriving from the year 100 gazillion to kill loads of people on Earth and just generally stop the Master. That's really across both Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords. But that sort of gives you a sense of where we are with this. And clearly, like the Harold Saxon character, it feels very interesting. You say it feels very much a television of a different era, but to see the sort of danger of charismatic politicians who are offering very little in terms of anything concrete in 2007, it feels rather prescient. But what was quite interesting was that clearly the target of this was Tony Blair. The sort of clean-cut, nice suit.
Slightly smarmy.
Yeah, smart. Yeah, the smarminess is very riffing on Blair, right? And I think, bear in mind that 2007 was the fag end of the Labour. It was 10 years after they'd first been elected.
Yeah,
and this was broadcast on the 23rd of June 2007. This was almost exactly the time that Blair himself stood down and was replaced then by Gordon Brown. And there was the public. His approval ratings were terrible. The public were absolutely sick of Tony Blair by that point. So just
no one talks about the brown bounce anymore now, do they?
No, they
phrase that amused me then and amuses me now.
Well, indeed. I do remember, in the 2005 general election, Michael Howard tried to get traction by saying, if you vote Blair, you'll get Brown. And then Labour activists actually going around saying, vote Blair, get Brown, because they felt that would probably be more popular. Anyway, the point is that this is very much a target of that, and a lot of this hits a lot of the same beats as Russell T Davis's Years and Years series, which is terrific, and indeed a lot of the stuff that's covered in Turn Left in the following series, I would argue to better result. But the
things taking a nasty fascist authoritarian turn in modern day Britain.
Yeah, following a politician who speaks as they find, that kind of thing. I mean, even to the extent that he recycles some of the material from this for years and years, like the Daily Mail reporter Vivian Rook, for example. Well, the Prime Minister played by Emma Thompson in Years and Years is called Vivian Rook. So he's not afraid to lean on his own influences and sort of recycle his material. He's a bit like
coming up with names must be hard.
Well, yeah, I think so. It reminds me a little bit of like it's like when you listen to Handel, like as in the Baroque composer.
Not Handel's the Cyberman from.
No, not Handel's the Cyberman, but like Handel as in the composer, where like you listen to one of the concertos, he's like, this sounds very familiar, and then when you Google it, it's like, he used that piece of music like 5 or 6 times. Real hack. No, I'm not saying that RTD's a hack, but he has preoccupations, and it's very clear as well with the Aniron Barnard character that's come up in the new series. Spoiler, sorry, that it's going to be another charismatic politician with posters up everywhere who's clearly who's clearly a wrong 'un. It's interesting. Toy box that Russell T Davies likes to play in, and I think that doing so in 2007, because we have a tendency to think of that period, because of the new Labour government, as being sort of, especially after austerity, the great financial crisis, Brexit, Trump, the invasion of Ukraine, COVID, all these major things that frankly feel like years and years, right?
Yeah.
We have a tendency to look back on this particular period, 97 through to 2007.
The halcyon age.
Exactly, and also one of kind of an enlightened, progressive time. But I think it's very easy to forget that at the time, the progressive left, among whom I think Russell D. Davies would pretty openly say he was a member or part of, were disgusted with what the Labour government was doing, talking about bogus asylum seekers and only giving vouchers and not money to asylum seekers, not allowing them to work, and creating detention centres like Yarl's Wood and so on and so forth. So, and a lot of the demonisation of immigrants, and particularly asylum seekers, happened under New Labour's watch. So, this is the kind of material. This is why it seems quite prescient, but actually a lot of the seeds of that stuff were being planted at the time.
Yeah, and it felt topical at the time, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
It didn't don't remember watching this in 2007 thinking like,
where's this come from?
Yeah, this is a bit of a reach.
No, but I can imagine, particularly our younger listener, maybe bumping on this a little bit, or thinking, is this just wildly prescient, or did it? No, it definitely felt relevant to the time it was in.
Yeah.
I haven't really talked about whether I liked it or anything.
No.
I'll leave that to you, Matt.
I'm not entirely sure if we've talked about Doctor Who much for the last 5
Sorry.
No.
Managed to get Tony Blair, handball.
This is the added value that our listeners...
both of them.
Actually, I wouldn't even bother finishing that sentence.
No, don't.
Did I like this?
I think they'll be the judge of that.
Yeah. Did I like this? Game of two halves, as I think is often the case for especially Davis season finales. I think the first episode is largely great with some reservations. I think the second is an absolute washout, bluntly.
Yeah.
There's a few things
I
to
think
mention.
the second episode is disastrous.
I mean,
I
think there's some interesting stuff in the second episode, but yes, it's basically... I mean, this, I think, almost sort of crystallizes end of season-itis, which is, I think, something that ultimately no Doctor Who showrunner of the modern era has really managed to escape from, which is that idea that, and I get, you get it, the modern TV drama dynamic demands that things go up a notch at the end of the season. The way old TV and classic Doctor was often made was that the final story would, in some cases, be the most underwhelming, because that would be a point where the money had run out, and it would just be a convenient pause point while they take it off air for a few weeks, and everyone gets a summer break, and then they come back in the autumn. And largely, I mean, so this is Davis's third season finale. First one gives us, essentially the pitch is more Daleks than you've ever seen before, and that's pretty cool. The second one gives you the shock pitch, Daleks versus Cybermen plus Rose Leaves. And the third one, it's the Return of the Master. We'll get onto that in a sec. But you've got that creep of like, oh my God, this is the biggest deal ever. It's that rising sense of scale. And same again, although I think the end of season 4 two-parter is considerably better than this. It's the raise the stakes so far in the first episode, and then have to largely do a bit of a disappointing climb down and resolution in the second, which is something that, definitely bedevils Davis for the rest of his run. Moffat never really cracks, and Chibnall, Chibnall gonna Chibnall. So it's a bit of a problem where, for Doctor Who to feel it has to be operating at that sort of scale and level of intensity where the stakes are so ludicrously high, it's a tricky act to pull off. So the resolution is disastrous. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it's bringing back the Master, who is... I seem to remember at the time there was a lot of debate. Obviously, bringing back the Daleks was a bit of a no-brainer. Bringing back the Cybermen, yeah, fine. They're the other monster everyone remembers. Doing Daleks versus Cybermen, new territory. Yes, that's quite exciting. There was a lot of debate in fan circles at the time, I seem to remember, about whether or not you could /would /should bring the Master back, because it's quite a cheesy idea that the series has perhaps over-relied on in the past. I think most people's broad brush view of the Master would be that the Delgado Master works because that's some sort of pitch perfect characterization amidst an attempt to turn Doctor Who in the Pertwee era into a more sort of formatted ensemble cast.
Yeah.
The Ainley Master, is, you can have some sort of affection towards him, but he's not a great character. And then, it's almost like the character's a cipher by the time the TV movie rolls around.
Yeah.
So the question of what would Davis do with the Master? How would he reinvent it? What would the layers be to put on it? And the solution he comes up with is basically go bigger, more insane, more unhinged, nastier, just like literally turn everything on this character up to 11 and get a really good actor to play him. And I think The Sound of Drums, episode 1, I think largely works, and I enjoy it because of John Sims' performance. I think he's got the chops to sell the batshit insanity. This is a character that if you hedged your bets playing it, it would just completely fall apart. But he's prepared to go there and deliver the goods. And that's also been the level at which the Master is sort of pitched subsequently, like obviously Michelle Gomez and Sacha Dhawan giving you sort of different takes on it. But the idea of the sort of essentially completely demented, psychopathic, like everything dialed up to 11 kind of read is what he does here. And I think it largely works here. But just, the plot, I'm going long on this, the plot in episode 1 just raises the stakes so far that the resolution in part 2 can't help but disappoint, because it's a sort of push a bunch of buttons, shuffling it around, this is part of my plan. That's to set aside the fact that there is a whole different set of messianic, Christ-like imagery that Davis brings to the table to explain to partly explain how this situation is resolved, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that makes you go, really? Is this what you did you? I mean, obviously you intended it for it to be anyway. So that's my take. I like. Episode 1 is very dramatic. It does raise the stakes. I think John Sim is great as the Master, and he kind of gives you a modern version of what this character could be. The resolution is absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, and I essentially agree with that. I think that, as I say, I think that the sort of, again, the sort of socio-political positioning of it is interesting, and Russell T Davies has proven time and time again, actually, that that it is worth listening to what he has to say about those particular issues as a piece of drama. Look, I think the problem with Doctor Who since 2005 is that it has actually been caught between two stools, in the sense that it's gone for the sort of mid-90s through to 21st century convention, certainly of shows like Star Trek The Next Generation, DS9, and through to the golden age of telly that we supposedly now live in. But
I think there's been a few golden ages of
right telly. But that convention of the end of season being the kind of bigger bang for your buck,
where it's all going to come together, and
but there's still
not just will it be good and dramatic, but your investment in the preceding however many weeks will be paid back handsomely.
Yeah, exactly. But I think as well, like if I think about those end of season specials on, I don't know, Star Trek The Next Generation, DS9, one thing that they were quite, either they would just be sort of bigger, right? Not necessarily more consequential, but you get to see, I don't know, you get to see the Borg or whatever. But like, if you think about the Best of Both Worlds, that was a very neat way of doing it, because the Best of Both Worlds was two-parter, but the first part was the end of season 3.
Yeah, it was cliffhanger split across the season.
Now, I think, that's one way to sort of build that anticipation. The problem with Doctor Who is that since 2005, they've had these end of season things which have to be bigger than ever, but also have to neatly resolve before the next season has started. And so you don't take on the consequences so much of what happens in that final episode into the rest of the season. So you can't... Yeah, and I just feel like it has to be really, really big and then resolved very quickly. And it's not that the fallout of that is then... So you inevitably get into a situation where you need a Deus Ex Machina because you want to tie everything up before you get into the next season, rather than, for example, the end of season being a big revelation. It has to be a whole story tied up with a bow. Yeah. Whereas it could be a revelation rather than the story or something like that. And that's how other serial dramas go about it. I think that's probably a better bet. Here,
which is, to be fair, something that Moffat, I mean, cack-handedly, I would say, but does, that kind of thing of like some knowledge that you might need. I suppose Davis does it as well, the whole kind of bad wolf, who is Harold Saxon kind of thing, although those are more motifs. But that idea that like everything will click into place with this final episode.
Yeah.
But it's often done extremely badly. No modern showrunner has really pulled off the finale.
No, I would agree with that. But if you think about it, right, Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who, and all of the showrunners have been fans of Doctor Who, right? They are the classic Doctor Who serial, whether it's 2-parter, 4-parter, 6-parter, finishes, right, and the story is wrapped up. And they seem to have taken the same view, although they've gone to the modern convention of having the end of series be a big thing, they'd still wrap it up. And I just think that is a mistake. It leads them down this cul-de-sac of bigger, rabbit out the hat. Then episode 1 next season is something else, and it leads you directly to, puzzle box, rabbit out of a hat kind of thing. And this one just doesn't work. I mean, basically, I think Russell T Davies had obviously written The Second Coming, starring Christopher Eccleston, which kind of leaves it open-ended as to whether that guy is Christ or not. But,
no, he is.
He is, 100%. Right? But it deals with questions of doubt and so on and so forth. He obviously wants to have that discussion about faith here. Not quite sure why, because I don't think he's got anything particularly interesting to say about it. Yeah. Other than hope brings people together. But the manifestation of that hope in everyone... I mean, like when John
there
Sims...
is a techno-babble explanation.
No, I know. But when John Sims Master says at the end, like, that's your plan, praying, I did feel like I sort of...
I feel like that might be Davis trying to give himself an out. Say, look, I've deconstructed this but it doesn't give him an out. It's like,
no, and the idea is basically...
I'm with the Master on this.
Oh, so am I. Martha Jones has gone around the world telling everyone, hope and believe in the Doctor, and basically all effectively pray at this one moment, mentioning the Doctor. And this will realign the psychic array in such a way that he will be able to regenerate his body from the Lazarus stuff. Anyway, the upshot is that a cosmic beam... And it's really, I mean, the CGI
everyone prays and yes,
and he gets better, and the CGI around it is horrible.
Yes,
like, it's so like the cage disappears that he's
in.
And
not only does he get to, not only is he resurrected, but he's then able to offer forgiveness to. I mean, it's just like
no, because he immediately says, I forgive you," and while he's surrounded by a full body halo drifting towards him. But not only that, but like
check any glasses of water on deck of the Valiant to check he's not accidentally turned them into wine.
Yeah, exactly, right? But also like I couldn't get over the fact that the cage disappears and also his clothes grow with him as well, which is bloody fortunate.
Yeah.
They at least have the decency in Journey's End and what's the other one? Journey's End and that two-parter.
But this is something that we've discussed before.
The Meta-Crisis Doctor is nude, right?
Yes.
Now, you don't need to see his bits, but he's nude. But like when this cosmic prayer beam hits him, his clothes grow with him. Now, I know that I know it's essentially a fantasy show. Right? The people who expect this to be all scientifically, I get that it's effectively inconsistent to insist that a show that has a guy in a magic box.
No, I disagree. I'm happy for it. I'm happy that we've talked about this before. Like the show can operate comfortably in the two worlds of like magic and mystery and the supernatural and all of that kind of thing. And I'm happy for the show to operate on that level, or it can operate in the scientific rationalist framework as well. And I'm happy for it to do that. The only time I ever have a problem is when you play the switcheroo and introduce a bit of spurious magic around something that is like otherwise cleaving to the rules of science, essentially.
Yeah,
it's like, and there is technobabble proffered to explain why this is happening, but it doesn't make sense.
I've had a year to plug into its matrices, all that sort of stuff.
How?
Yeah, no, it's like
how would you go about doing it? So I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier, which I think might get us back to discussing the Master a bit more. You mentioned that that obviously all the modern showrunners have been fans of the show, and I looked up this quote from it's in the book The Long Game, which is the basically the story of what happened between the TV movie and the show coming back in terms of how it got brought. It's a really interesting book, which I do thoroughly recommend. But there's an interview with Gary Gillett in it, who was the editor of Doctor Who magazine in the mid-90s, and he ran a poll of fans at some point in the magazine in the 90s about, who would you like to bring the show back? And a lot of the kind of fan names like, Davis, Moffat, already making names for themselves in the TV industry were all in there.
Yeah.
But there were nominations for people including any bugger to whom it's not an ambition and anyone who has had nothing to do with it before. And in analysing those quotes, Gillett says something which I think is really this is some of the most on-the-nose criticism of Doctor Who I think I've ever seen. He says, I think the sentiment behind that wish still exists today. Doctor Who is forever fated, I feel, however imaginative the revival or relaunch or new producer, to decay or maybe merely relax to a lower energy state. That lower energy state is men in Time Lord collars shouting at each other about the imminent collapse of the tachyon barrier or some such. Even Russell and Stephen, for all their skill, couldn't escape it. Chris Chibnall tried for a year and then ended up right back there. That whole alienating Arc of Infinity squabbling rubberiness. So when they say they want someone new to take charge, they mean someone to keep Doctor Who away from that for as long as possible, to take it somewhere new for that delicious, precious 5 minutes before Gallifrey's tachyon barrier falls again.
Yeah.
And that is sort of, in a nutshell, I think, you can see the temptation to bring the Master back, but it always takes you into that space because it's a dramatic button to push, particularly if you put it on the table there as part of the mythology of the show. There's another Time Lord, but he's evil. It raises the stakes, and you go, "Oh my god, that face-off is going to be, intensely personal. This is going to be so dramatic. Maybe you could imply that they were maybe even brothers or something."
Yeah,
and it's dramatic, but in ways that are utterly conventional, because those are the kind of buttons that Star Wars and all sorts of other things that get more into that sort of dynastic, just sort of boringly conventional narratives. That's where it takes you. And I think, Davis goes very well. He successfully reinvents the Daleks in Series 1. He's really careful about, how he parcels out, the fact that we wait, over 2 years until we get a mention of the word Gallifrey. He's so restrained in those first few years. And yet, once you introduce the Master, you're then only a year and a bit off from having the Master come back to Gallifrey to shoot Rassilon with laser beams coming out of his hands. And then it's a way you're just into that world of like Time Lords and Gallifrey and bringing it back and bringing the Master back and raising the stakes, and it's like it's just always going to take Doctor Who back to a very conventional place, and I think that's the thing. For all that, I think there is some flair in terms of how the Master is deployed here.
Well, thank God Chibnall tore up that script then, hey?
I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's like, yeah, bloody hell. But yeah, it's just like, it's sort of the point where you go like, and actually, I think Series 4, there's an argument for that being some of Davis's best work on the series. So I'm not saying it ruins the show, but it's the point where suddenly it's like, all right, fine, we're going to go back into the mythology. And then, ultimately all he and then Moffat and Chibnall are doing is the same sort of, like, we'll have in the 80s, we'll have a Gallifrey episode almost every season. There's like, 1983, you've got 2 stories in the same year about traitors on the High Council of Time Lords. It's like, it's just this sort of irresistible pull back to that world.
Yeah.
And, sure enough, doing a story where you get to see a flashback of the Master as a child means that the old Time Lord costumes can come out. So it's just like this.
Oh, yeah, you see, but this is the problem, because then you get people like me who are very affectionate for the silly collars and all the rest of it.
No, we love it. And we go, oh my God, it's got the seal of Rassilon on it, this original one from Deadly Assassin. And then it just ruins the show.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's like...
What do we think about that sort of child abuse element? Because that's clearly what it is, to sort of do something so...
Yeah, so this is... I mean, this goes a bit further than I think what's implied about the decadence of the Time Lords. So when the Doctor says that children at the age of 8 are taken from their families and sent to the academy, but they also have to pass this initiation test that involves, as we snarked earlier, watching the Doctor Who title sequence in a giant mirror, but staring into the vortex and seeing the entirety of time. Which
sounds a bit much, doesn't it?
Well, at least in the case of the Master, produces, and we could talk about how the Master talks a lot about the drumming in his head, and they go a lot further, I think, in the End of Time two-parter as well, about presenting the John Sim Master as like genuinely suffering from some serious mental demons. I mean, this is a very heavily afflicted.
Well, in the End of Time, it's I think pretty categorically said that the Time Lords implanted the beat there to drive him insane, so that he would be a better warrior from day one.
Yeah, but yes, it's a grim element, and there are a couple of grim elements. I mean, it gives the Master a bit of an origin story. I don't think it's a necessarily terrible or illogical one.
No, I thought that was all right, to be honest.
But I suppose there is one thing about... There's one thing that I did also want to talk about the Master, which is that obviously just as we said, that Davis turns everything up to 11 with this version of the character. So, the villainy, the scale of what he's prepared to do, the amount, the whole paradox machine, which I do think is quite clever about, how it's going to get the future humanity to wipe out its past, but all exist in glorious chaos, blah, blah, blah. He's not messing around. But there is the bit at the beginning of Last of the Time Lords where he comes out with Lucy, his wife, his companion, and she's got a very prominent black eye. And the implication, to me, this is going a bit too far, because it's like the implication clearly is that the Master is not just villainous to the point where he's prepared to wipe out 10% of the planet, he's also a sexually violent man, that he has assaulted her. And, she's made to wear sort of red evening dresses and things throughout. So there's a sexually violent and coercive aspect to
in addition to which
is like, I'm not sure if that I mean, it's sort of like you don't need to introduce that element to it to prove the Master's villainy. And then, as
she's also playing it sort of, I know, it's like she's drugged or something.
Yeah.
In those scenes, and she's a good enough. I can't remember the actor's name, but she's.
I think she's really good.
Yeah,
the actress whose name you were
Alexandra Moen.
Yes, thank you.
So she's very, very good.
She's great.
So
that scene in the switcheroo with Vivian Rook, where she reveals,
Yeah.
she sort of looks like she might be tempted to shop Harold Saxon, and then you realise she's completely in.
But in that scene, the one with the red dress in that, she is playing it as if she's on Valium or something.
Yeah.
Like, or I don't want to say drunk. It's not quite drunk, but like off. I would have said on Valium or something.
Yeah.
It's very like she stumbles a little bit and kind of looks glaze-eyed and so on and so forth. It's a horrible little. I mean, it's a horrible moment. And is it necessary? I sort of think that you can't sort of. It's difficult. I'm not saying you shouldn't go into that territory. I think Doctor Who has tackled abusive relationships pretty well in some circumstances.
It's not tackling it though. It's just putting it there on the table.
It's just there as It's just there as
which is then it's like when
deal with it and deal with it properly, or
because then
aside.
that's also the thing. Because I was then thinking of that in the final scene where obviously the dramatic being, as I say, in terms of like how the presence of the Master supposedly dramatically raises the stakes for the Doctor. When the Doctor's weeping over the Master's dead body, it's like this episode has also essentially put on the table that the man is a rapist as well, and it's like this is meant to tug the heartstrings as well.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, I get that there's meant to be, no, but it's like, it's an argument I've heard sort of ascribed to some more sort of right-leaning comic book writers who say that for villains to be villainous we have to see them go around and rape and assault people so that we know that they're truly evil. And it's like, I think unless you're actually going to do something about that, like it rather I don't know,
I would agree
it struck me
with
as like too nasty, because that's not what this is meant to be about.
No, I think you're exactly right. Deal with that and actually have it be the emotional ballast of the story you're trying to tell, or don't.
Yeah.
But to have it as a sort of,
we gain nothing by the implication that the Master's a rapist.
No, I don't. I would agree. But I do think that just the idea of the Doctor's arrogance in this, because this does come back in the specials, particularly Waters of Mars, and so on, like the End of Time. But the Doctor's arrogance, the sort of Time Lord victorious stuff, when he says. He sees the Master, he goes, I'm a Time Lord, he's my responsibility. And like Captain Jack has a perfectly reasonable plan at one point of just going up and breaking the Master's neck before any of this shit has happened. And the Doctor says, no, that sounds very military and all that sort of stuff. Evidently, it would be the best thing. So, I think you can argue that, when you were saying about the Doctor sort of inexplicably being sad, or that Russell T Davies trying to pull on the audience's heartstrings when the Master's body is being burned and the Doctor's sad about it. But I think, to be fair to Russell T Davies, he's trying to get us to the point where we do think the Doctor is wrong, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Because he's been wrong several times. He was wrong not to just let Jack go up and break his neck. He's wrong to want to redeem him. I mean, I think when the Master actually gets shot by Martha's sister, are we really meant to side with the Doctor in that point after the atrocities of what the Master's done? It's fully explicable that they would, So, but yeah, I agree with you on the Lucy Saxon point. I think that.
Which is a shame, because otherwise that sort of, and I know it's something that some of the big finishes have done stuff with as well, that it's within the limited spectrum of interesting things you can do with the Master as a sort of cracked mirror inversion of the Doctor. Give him a companion is something that the classic, I mean, there are people that have fallen under the Master's sway, but the idea that he might take on a human being to show the universe as part of seeding chaos is, potentially quite interesting. And I think she's very good as well. It sort of works because of her performance.
I basically, I think that Russell T Davies is interested in he's interested in various different things in writing this. The drip slide to fascism, the nature of faith in a modern society, and whether faith and solidarity can sort of coexist, or there's a useful way for us to think about faith. And ultimately, that musing on solidarity and faith in a modern setting, it just fails a suspension of disbelief test, because it just doesn't hang together narratively properly and conclude in that way. But I will say this: the Master at one point has a go at the American president and makes fun of grits. And I quite liked the fact that he made fun of grits. What even are grits? It's the kind of question a British person would ask. And this is a British show after all, so I quite enjoyed that. And I also liked the Toclafane when they were sort of dissecting the one that they captured, and they asked it, so why do you go around killing me? Because it's fun.
Yeah.
That was really super chilling. And also the design of the Toclafane interior is horrific.
Yeah.
like pleasantly horrific.
It's a string of stuff that is as bleak and nihilistic and disturbing and unpleasant as Doctor Who gets. But
with basically children committing atrocities as well. So it's which obviously has sadly happened in past.
There's no... I guess, I don't know. It's like it lays. I mean, especially that second episode, it lays it on with such a trowel. Like the horror and the bleakness of it. That in a way, the resolution of it is so cheap. So just the magical resurrection of the Doctor, woohoo, and how just time rolls back. Let's run some footage of some clouds going backwards.
Oh yeah, full reset button.
All of that.
Yeah.
I mean, literally a full reset button. That in some ways, like, it actually doesn't take away the nasty taste of what you've seen. What you don't get is that sort of, Dr. Dance's kind of what has been quite a dark episode dealing with some, potentially quite harrowing themes.
Yes.
Does manage to get to that sort of life-affirming, this is a triumph. Whereas this doesn't get there because the resolution is so cheap. Like, at the end of it, you're just still harrowed somewhat by...
Well, yeah, I mean, and actually, even Martha Jones, when she departs, she said, it's all real, but that stuff still happened.
Yes.
I think it's her anyway. One of the Jones family, but
I think it's the mum.
It's like, but it still happened, and I sort of felt, yeah,
it did,
it did,
and we watched it.
Yeah.
Okay, now our next band are from Australia, and the lead singer is none other than Neighbours' Natalie Bassingthwaighte. Please welcome the Rogue Traders.
So we're getting towards the end of our second episode of our third season of I'll Explain Later. But, yeah, in case you were wondering last week whether this format point would survive to a second outing, it's time for our question of the week. And we have... It's not particularly related to any of the episodes that we've watched today, although we obviously talked a lot about... especially in the Underwater Menace, like the companions who we like being, one of the key attractions are there. But I asked you, John, to have a think about who do you feel is the most underrated companion? And by this, I mean there are, everyone talks about Sarah Jane Smith, obviously, and the Brigadier, and then in the modern series, sort of Rose and maybe Donna as being these sort of great fully rounded characters. Joe Grant, obviously someone that we've come back to time and time again that we really love. But there are these characters who were certainly regulars in Doctor Who for a certain period of time, who don't really get their dues, and it's quite interesting to go back and see them in action when looking at old episodes. So I have got two in my mind because I have a feeling that one of them will probably be the same. Not sure which one. So John, who do you think is the most underrated Doctor Who companion?
I mean, it's Ben and Polly. It's a really dull answer in many ways, because I just feel like, obviously I think that Jamie and Victoria get the kind of proper love within the Troughton era, and as for Hartnell, a lot of the focus is on Ian and Barbara, and maybe a little bit of Stephen. So I just feel like Ben and Polly don't get the affection or the associations with the era that that others do. It's a dull choice given we've just spoken about them at quite some length. But yeah, I think they're the ones that I feel are most underrated, and I bracket them as one choice.
Yeah.
I don't know whether my other choice is necessarily underrated within fandom, but I feel didn't get the acclaim in the era. Wasn't particularly popular either, I suppose. But I think within fandom, actually, she's really loved. But Bill in season 10, who again, I feel Pearl Mackey's performance was outstanding. I'm perplexed that I haven't seen her in loads more stuff since then, because she was such a brilliant and natural performer. And I thought that the character was well drawn, and it's far and away the best season of Capaldi's Doctor Who anyway, season 10, I think. And I thought it was brilliant. I don't think that era perhaps landed very much in the consciousness in the same way that like Tennant and Matt Smith's did.
Yeah.
So people don't necessarily associate her with Doctor Who in the same way as they do
Billy Piper.
Yeah, exactly.
Jenna Coleman even.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. So those are the choices I had. Go on then.
Well, I'm also just going to say, because we did have some correspondence on this one from listener, friend of the show, and friend of ours as well. So not necessarily in that order of priority, but Carl Swift wrote to us to agree with you, actually. He said, Bill, really excellent character, in that there was some actual depth of character attempted, and he also really rated Pearl Mackey's performance. He also said, maybe the bloke who was John Bishop, which I did like. So yeah, no, Bill's a great shout. I have got two in mind, more of a sort of answer and non-honourable mention. I would say my answer is Stephen, as played by Peter Purves, because I think he barely figured. I mean, his sort of reputation is like the Doctor Who and the Blue Peter and Crufts guy. Did you know he was an actor and he was in Doctor Who in the 60s? It's sort of, that's about as far as it goes. But he's A, really good, but also B, in that Hartnell era where they're not at that point taking it for granted in terms of any sort of archetypes as to what these characters are for. So you look at that original lineup of Ian, Susan, Barbara, they're all doing different things and can serve different roles in the plot as the story demands it. Obviously, then when they introduce Vicky, she is performing the same role as Susan, but offers a very different sort of flavour and perspective on it.
Yeah.
And Stephen is interesting because he's there to do the in Chesterton, Hartnell is not going to be the man of action, so you need someone younger who can do that. But I like the way that he's there to slightly prick the Doctor's conscience and actively challenging on what he's doing a lot of the time, which is also
in the Massacre he does that a lot.
I mean, that scene at the end of the Massacre is knockout, and really doesn't come up enough, I think, in those sort of great scenes where, like, Stephen basically tears the Doctor a new one in terms of saying, like, the irresponsibility of your, essentially tourism, the privilege that you show of going up, but in terms of, like, the danger it puts everyone in and the risk it causes. And he does that, in a couple of the other stories that we've seen as well. I think it's great, and I think the idea of having, a character there who's really designed to put the Doctor on the spot. The idea, probably this might overlap with some of the stuff we'll talk about on next week's episode, but it's quite a modern series conceit to put the Doctor's behaviour and the boundaries of it, and his responsibility and how flawed he is, as a topic for discussion in the show. And the classic series doesn't really do it, but Steve,
except in the Hartnell era,
except
in the Aztecs, where Barbara calls him on his lack of interventionist,
or in the very first story where he's about to bludgeon a caveman to death until Ian says, maybe.
So
not.
It's basically the Hartnell era and the modern era, and not really much in between. I would agree with that completely.
But also Peter Purves is great and gives a really good.
Well, he's Ian and Barbara basically, isn't he? He's Ian and Barbara.
That's an extremely good point. Yeah. So that was my main answer. I'm also going to give an honourable mention to Mel, who I don't think anyone's going to argue that she was particularly well served by the scripts that she's in, or certainly the era in which she took part.
Or indeed her performances.
I mean...
Oh, no, it's not her fault.
I think we both have a lot of affection for Bonnie Langford, sort of, certainly as a presence in the culture.
I do remember...
And actually also as a performer.
I do remember when we reviewed Trial of a Time Lord.
Yeah, this is mainly based on Terror of the Vervoids. Which I'm talking about, which is where, like, after... And they sort of do turn around Perry's character a bit throughout Trial of a Time Lord, but after these sort of endlessly antagonistic relationships that the Doctor's had throughout the 80s with his companions, Tedian, Turlough, Nyssa, Adric, the archetypal 80s TARDIS crew squabbling with each other all the time.
Yeah.
It's such a blessed relief when someone, bouncy, who's happy to be there, enjoys the adventure, actually enjoys the japes of hanging out with the Doctor, and also is, at least at that point, capable enough to actually go out and smash up a computer herself and stuff like that. And do a bit of investigating.
This is what we quite liked, I think, both of us, about Jamie's comment at the end of Underwater Menace. Yeah. She said, I actually really enjoy. I love being with these guys. Yeah, and certainly Mel gives that, and I think Bonnie Langford's, she's really maligned as just a scream with curls, and
she does what she can with the material, but she takes it seriously. I mean, just like she turns up and does the best she can.
She's positive.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think that's a reasonable honourable mention. But
there you go, honourable mention. Yes,
I think my choices were better, but other than that, good call.
Well, on that note, we would like to hear from you on this or any other matters that
have affected
you over the course of the last hour and a half. So please do drop John a line on Twitter if you're still holding out there
at Explain Later
Pod on Twitter, or you can drop me an email the old-fashioned way, hello@illexplainlater.com. But yes. 2 episodes down in this season, 4 to go, and still got to get used to the fact of saying this, but we'll be back next week.
Yep.
With some more Doctor Who. Another question of the week.
Yeah. So what are we doing next week? We're doing Boomtown.
Okay. We're actually going to coming. I suppose we could do it coming soon. So yes, next week it's a Welsh special. We're looking at Boomtown and the Green Death.
Yes.
So join us then.
We'll do a sweepstake as to how long I can last, how long I can hold out before doing a Welsh accent.
Oh, God. All right. Maybe viewers of a nervous disposition could give next week's episode a miss. But anyway, we'll be back next week. Thanks so much for listening, and see you soon.
Goodbye.